Enzo Maresca should leave Chelsea if he doesn't get these three signings. With already speculation, well, fan speculation, that he should be sacked after one loss in the Club World Cup. It could be a very long or very short season, actually, in fact, for him. So why shouldn't he say, I want these three players, otherwise I'm going? Now we'll come to our resident Chelsea fan, Jordan, who's going to tell us what players Chelsea actually need for him to be successful and get fans off his back, really. So over to you, Jordan. Who's your
Yeah,
first one?
well, pretty good place to start is just addressing the fact that the how soft some social media fans are these days. We've had a great end to the season. Suddenly, we lose one game in the Club World Cup, and the world is ending. I did a TikTok on it, but yeah, let's not get carried away. But look, Maresca, he obviously needs support from the board. I think we're off the back of a positive end to the season. We've got a young squad, but it's very important now that we invest in these three signings. I'm going to come on to if we really want to get up the league and start competing. Um, we'll start with the main one for me, and what I mean by main is probably the weakest position we have at the moment, and that's obviously a goalkeeper. Robert Sanchez, we know the stats. Obviously, most errors leading to goals in the Premier League, as well as pretty much up there in all the metrics of the top five leagues in Europe. The only thing I would say is he did have the highest save percentage in the Prem. So as bad as he's been, as many mistakes as there has been, it is important to also address the positives. But I do think the bottom line is that he is not the man that is going to take us to winning the league title again. So for me, there's one man on the list that I think is phenomenal, and I also think is quite realistic, and that is Gigi Donnarumma. So I'll give you a quick overview as to why I think we'd all probably describe him as a world class keeper in terms of he's won the big trophies, he's competed at the highest level. Numbers wise, he's obviously out of contract next year in June, so he's got a year left on his contract. Currently being negotiated with PSG, but now would be a perfect time to swoop in and put in a bid to really ruffle some feathers. Um, Again, I've touched on some of his accolades that we know of. He's got caps at every level, the highest level. He's got caps for Italy. But the key metric I was looking at is the passing completion rate, which we're looking around the 92% mark, which puts him among the top five keepers in Europe. So for me, still at the prime age of 26, a keeper who's been there and done it, and very clearly is better than Sanchez in pretty much every metric. I think that would be a phenomenal bit of business. And in terms of price, I think we'd be looking around the 40 to 50 million pounds mark based on the fact he's out of contract next summer. So yeah, what do you guys think on that one?
Well, I'll start off. I think he's a brilliant keeper, and I don't think there's many clubs in the world that wouldn't take him. And if it is at that price, the sort of 40, 50 million mark, I still think that's a great price for a keeper that's, yeah, 26 years old. Not young, but not old. Keepers go on for longer, as we've sort of seen in the past. Um, I think the biggest problem is, will he go to Chelsea? You have got European football, but like you sort of said, you're currently not at the level where you're competing for titles. And considering he's just come off back of winning the Champions League with PSG, winning titles at PSG, I think that's where he'll want, if he's going to move, is wanting to go to a club that definitely will compete for the title, and that's the sort of risk I think for him as such. Because Chelsea, there's no guarantee with it. It's you're still in your sort of process, like you said. You've got the youngest squad in the league, I think it is. So it's kind of, do you want to take that risk when he could just go to sort of, I don't know who, for example, but let's just say other clubs that can guarantee winning trophies, even at PSG still, if he stays. So that's where my concern about, obviously you wanting him, I completely agree with, but does it work for him? I'm not quite so sure.
Yeah, I think the fact we are in Champions League obviously makes a big impact. I think if we were still in Europa or Conference, I think that's more of a point because it's like, okay, when are Chelsea going to be back in the Champions League? And that is a big concern. But I think when you've won a couple of league titles with PSG, he's now got that Champions League medal anyway. I don't see that as much of an issue. You're not, with all due respect, you're not celebrating winning League One that much, are you? Like you've done it, great. It's a one team league. I think it's just a risk of not being in the Champions League because we've done that now. I think as a keeper, you'd probably back yourself to help improve us and keep us at that level at least.
Reece, what do you
I
think of
mean,
Donnarumma? Yeah.
I like Donnarumma a lot. When he burst onto the scene at AC Milan all them years ago, we saw that there was something special in what was he at the time? What, 15, 16 when he started playing? The guy's a monster. And if you look at the size of him, and I think a lot of people were surprised he went to PSG at the time, on a free transfer. Um, Look, I do like him a lot, and I do think he's better than what Chelsea currently have. However, I he got 13 clean sheets overall in 40 games. Sorry, in 42 games last season. I wouldn't exactly say that's standout. Yes, six of them come in the Champions League, which is impressive. So it goes to show how he grew as the time went on. But for a guy his size, or maybe the way PSG play to be conceding goals, I probably might expect a little bit more. And I would have to say to myself, why aren't PSG desperately trying to keep hold of him? Um, and we're making a lot of noise about it, but Chelsea fans have been making a lot of noise about Petrovic as well, who's sort of obviously on loan at Strasbourg. Why aren't they just going to go full throttle and go for him? Why would they potentially be looking for a keeper if he's supposed to be the solution?
Yeah, the Petrovic thing's weird, and I honestly think if you ask every Chelsea fan right now, no one really knows why Petrovic isn't being given a chance. Um, Look, if we don't want to spend money and we're trying to be within PSR whatever, and we want to reinvest funds elsewhere, then I do think Petrovic has done enough to at least deserve to be in the top two. Whether it's Sanchez, I saw rumours earlier today about West Ham being interested in Sanchez. If that's true, absolutely, he's a phenomenal goalkeeper. West Ham, high save percentage in the Prem. Please take him off our hands for a reasonable price. But you know, Petrovic is a mystery. As I said, when he played for us, he didn't do much wrong. Wasn't really any errors. Stats looks okay, and he can pass the ball. But he's not Donnarumma. He's not been there and done it at the highest level. So for me, I would spend 40, 50, even 60 million to go, here's a world-class goalkeeper. He's done it at the highest level. And at 26, he could be at the club for another 10 years at a decent level. So for me, that makes sense to reinvest that to invest that money in him. But yeah, if we don't want to spend, give Petrovic a go. Like I don't understand.
So let's sort of make the argument. Let's say sort of Donnarumma's off the table, can't be done. Petrovic doesn't look like Maresca fancies him, or Chelsea don't want him, looking to sell him on. Who would be the sort of alternatives for Chelsea? Because I've got a few names here. So one is obviously, was it Maginan from AC Milan, the one that Chelsea were rumoured with. That's one that seems more likely, if that makes sense. However, that sort of may have sort of stopped because that was at a cheaper price. I think Chelsea wanted to pay something like what 10 million for him or something very low.
Yeah, we were off in valuation basically. 1 year left on the contract. AC wanted about 25, 30 mil, and we just weren't willing to pay it. So as of right now, it looks like that deal's off. Um, I think he's an upgrade on Sanchez, but I don't. I think there's definitely been some question marks. If I'm being honest, there is basically I'd have a lot more faith in Donnarumma. Let's put it that way. But with Maignan, there is an upside, but there's still a few little red flags about him, which wouldn't give me 100% conviction in signing him. Um, the two names that are a bit random that don't really fit with our model that I like, Jan Oblak, I've liked him for a while, and Emi Martinez. They'd be my two kind of proven quality goalkeepers.
Well,
But I don't think they're
Martinez
realistic.
Martinez is technically available. He's kind of
Mm.
said his goodbye to Villa, which I found quite odd when he's not had a club secure. secured for him.
Yeah.
I thought if he was going to be leaving for whatever reason, he'd be like, I'm actually going to this club. Done. He would have sort of been done by now. So the fact that he said he wants to leave does leave him open to sort of, he was one of the names I'd written down as well. I think one that fits Chelsea's model a bit better is Trafford. Because one, very young, I think he's 22. And two, he's played at City, and Chelsea just love signing ex-City players. So I think he fits your model perfectly to a T there.
Yeah. I think I saw earlier today actually he's rumoured with Newcastle, if
He
I'm not
is, yeah.
mistaken. So yeah, that's interesting. But to be honest, that's a good shout. I do like that. But
Reese,
again,
any
it's not
comments
proven.
on? No, not fully proven, but seems to be quite a good goalie with the record he was having at Burnley last year.
Yeah.
Reese, any comments on what keeper could fit Chelsea?
I think there's no harm in giving Petrovic a try. Um, I agree. I wouldn't go for Mike Maignan. I wouldn't. I think if you want to go for Serie A's best, you have to go for Miles Villa. I've just butchered that, so I'll repronounce it when I can. Miles Villa, the Roma goalkeeper. He's probably the best goalkeeper in Serie A at this moment in time. Somebody who hasn't really had a lucky break and has actually been phenomenal um, when he was playing. He could work. I think he fits Chelsea's profile quite nicely. He's only 25, so he's got a lot to offer. He would be my pick. However, I don't think there's anything wrong with going with maybe an experienced keeper. I agree, yeah, someone who's won trophies probably helps. However, my other pick is also in Syria, and that's Torino, and that is Milikovic Savic, who, of course, is a relation to the other Milikovic Savic. Um, he's been at Torino for a long time, and I don't think he's really got his flowers yet as a goalkeeper. But he's 28, so still offers a lot there. I think he would be a really good fit for Chelsea, and I think maybe he'd offer something a little bit more than what our chosen ones have, And I think at Torino, you'd probably get him for a very nice fee as well.
Well, I think 28 is the problem. He's too old for our model. I was going to make that case with Donnarumma. You look at our average age and it's below that. So even at 26 for Donnarumma, that could be a concern. He's too old, which is just mental to say. But yeah, I think Donnarumma would be the one that I would be very, very excited about. The others, I'd be like, okay, less excited. But I think out of all of those backups, I think Trafford would make the most sense out of all of them in terms of price, age, fit, etc.
Moving on then, what's your second sort of transfer then? What position are you sort of going for here?
So I've focused on a winger, leaning more towards a left winger. Um, but both of my picks here can play both sides, and you could also argue they can play down the middle as well if we need to. So I'll start with the one who is my preference, but I don't think is the most realistic transfer. I mean, it would cost us a lot, and that's Desiree Doué. Look, at this point, he's announced himself on the world stage with his performances in the Champions League, so everyone's fully aware of how good he is. But at 19 years old, he's got it all in an attacking sense. Like he has got it all. Quick, skillful. He can finish. He can play both sides. He could arguably play down the middle. Could even put him up front. He is phenomenal, and I think he would answer a lot of our problems in that wide area because we've got again. Look, I don't think we're desperate. We're as desperate as people are making out. We've got Neto, who, despite a lot of criticism, I really like. We have got Madueke, I can't pronounce his name right, who has glimpses of potential, isn't consistent enough at the moment. We've obviously got Willian Esteval coming in, who looks unbelievable. Again, his potential we don't know yet, but he's going to be an option. Um, Definitely missing some of our wingers. Mudryk, we know, is done and dusted by the looks of it for the next 4 years. So we do need some depth there, but I don't think we're absolutely like unbelievably desperate. But we do need a little bit more depth there. And adding a player like Doué into that team would be unbelievable. And he fits the model because he's 19. The only issue with his transfer, well, there's two issues. One, he seems to be on the rise at PSG, so it might be a weird time for him to leave. And two, this would cost us an arm and a leg to get this transfer over the line because PSG paid £50 million for him. Sorry, 50 million euros. So to get this over the line, we'd probably need to double their investment, which would be what, 100 million euros, which is probably 80, 90 million pounds, which is we're getting into silly figures here. Um, so we're gonna have to kind of break the bank for him, but I I think it's worth it. So yeah, he would be my preference. What do you guys think of that first of all, most?
Look, when we've watched him in the Champions League, and just looking stats wise, he looks like he overperformed more. He like performed a lot better in the Champions League than he did in the league. So I think I'm looking at sort of Champions League stats: 16 games, 5 goals, 3 assists. But in the league, 31 games, 6 goals, 6 assists. Like, it's quite surprising that he's done so well in the Champions League and not. I wouldn't say they're bad stats for sort of his age, but not. They're not setting the world alight every single week. If that's what I'm, if you understand where I'm coming from in that.
Yeah.
When I've watched him I've watched him only in the Champions League. Being totally honest, he looks brilliant. He looks electric. He is that player that sort of makes you want to watch football kind of thing. He's so exciting. And he's putting the ball in the back of the net or creating assists. But that slightly concerns me that he's not done it. He's not got 10 goals, 10 assists in League One. If he had, I'd struggle to find an argument against him. That's kind of where I'm at with him. I've not watched him every week, so I'm not going to say I'm an expert on him. But 6 goals, 6 assists for PSG in 31 games isn't that exciting when they're so dominant in the league. I know there are a few good sides out there, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying it's complete farmers and everything, but I'd expect a little bit more to be warranting the 100 sort of million mark, which you're probably talking about, which is probably right. I think PSG wouldn't sell him for any less than that, and that's even if they say yes. Kind of thing. They might not. They might just go, it's an absolute no. I don't care what you're coming in with an offer.
Yeah, I think the only thing to be honest, I completely agree. The stats are low to justify that price tag. So you are again, you're paying for the potential you've seen at the high level. I do think there's a lot of rotation in the PSG side, and again, it comes on to my next point as a backup, but there is a lot of rotation, and obviously they're winning games at 60 minutes, right? So there is a lot of subs being made around that mark. So I don't have his minute stats exactly, but I imagine it does probably rank a bit lower than some of the others. And this has been a bit of a breakout season for him in a way. Reese, what do you think on Doué?
Yeah, I've been a fan of Doué in his days at Rennes. There was definitely a player there who we thought was going to explode, and it was going to have to be the right club he was going to join to get that potential. If he would have joined Chelsea last season instead of PSG, would we be talking about the same Doué that we see today? Probably not. No. The issue with that is where are you going to fit him and where is he going to play? Is he going to play in that attacking midfielder role? Is he going to play in like a more central sort of midfield role, or are you going to play him on the wing? I don't look too much into his goals and assist record from last season because, I mean, at 20 years old, I wouldn't expect too much. This isn't a Kylian Mbappe sort of type of player, but he's playing in a very system based team, and in League On, a lot of the opposition are going to defend really deep against PSG. So I wouldn't expect, unless he was an attacker, to be putting up them sorts of numbers. But yeah, PSG are in positions where they can rotate, and of course they can do that. But he's been impressive. It's the transfer value. Do I see him as currently indispensable by PSG? Yes, I do. I do not see PSG letting him go, even if you offered that 100 million euro, 100 million valuation. I don't see it because I don't think at the moment PSG are really in the business to be letting those players go. However, they are in a similar situation to Chelsea, which is talent hoarding. And when you talent hoard, that means some of the players that you probably don't want to go will have to go. And I think there'll be another sort of couple of players in that PSG squad that I think Chelsea might target instead.
Yeah, well, I guess let's touch on the backup. And again, it seems so far that I just want to raid PSG, but the other similar player is Bradley Barcola. Again, same issue where they've been, Barcola and Doué at times have kept each other out of the PSG side. So there's been a lot of rotation between the two. Again, Barcola slightly older, he's 22, but again, we have seen his potential at the highest level. We have seen him for France as well, putting in some great performances. So, and again, to Jamie's point around the stats, we go right. Okay, more goals, more assists than Doué. So you could argue a little bit further along in terms of his potential. Cost wise, it would be less than Doué. It'd be around probably 70 million, I'd suggest, and that's in euros. So, 60 million might be enough to get the deal over the line. Maybe 70 at a push. Again, he can play on both sides. I probably wouldn't put him in the middle. He's better as a wide man. But again, you look at a player young, fits the profile, proven at the highest level, reasonable-ish transfer fee. I think he's again a perfect addition to the squad. What do you guys make on Barcola?
I think he was the person I was hinting to. And look, Barkle is a great player. His stats, yes, they're better than Doué if we want to go all about stats. There's no doubt about that. He played what 59 games in total if you include the Club World Cup. As well, 21 goals, 19 assists. That's very, very good numbers. And he's on the left wing. He'll be more consistent, I believe, than what Chelsea currently have in Madueke and Neto. And I like both players. I just think he's probably more consistent, be more precise in his role there. And apparently he isn't massively happy under Enrique at the moment because he's playing second fiddle to Kavichi. Kavichi, I'm just going to call him that, the Jordan Messi. So, you know, that's probably expected. So that's why I thought he'd be one that would probably be up for grabs. I think even if his valuation's around 70, 80 million, I think you probably would get him for less than that. But I also think there are going to be a lot of clubs circling around him if they know that he's in a situation where he probably might look for a way out. And I think he'd be an excellent addition, not just for Chelsea, but if he joins the Premier League. I rate him highly. I think he's a more attainable option. But yeah, it's of course that means Chelsea would have to shift off probably one or two of their players to bring him in. But I think he's more attainable, and I think from what is out there at the moment, he fits the profile perfectly.
Yeah,
I would say he'd still be a great fit for Chelsea. I think he's better than your current wingers. I think Madueke is so inconsistent. The games I've watched him, I don't know, as a Chelsea fan, do you find him frustrating? Because watching him, some of the stuff I've seen him have, sort of like moments where I go, you can see there's something, and then there's sort of other games where you just see absolutely nothing. You're like, you've had a terrible day, but it's just that inconsistency, and I think Barcola would do a better job, and I think he probably is overall a better player. Neto, I've sort of said this since you sort of signed him, and he's slightly proved me wrong in this Club World Cup, is his finishing. I think he's a really good down the line kind of winger, and sometimes lacks that sort of final ball. He is starting to do it a bit more. Like I said, in the Club World Cup, seen him, if he's got 2 goals in 2 games, he's starting to do it a bit more. But I'd say Barcola probably would be ahead of him as well. So I think it would be a really good signing. I didn't know, to be fair, that he's sort of like slightly unhappy because he is playing a bit of a second fiddle at times. So that could be a good way of getting him into, like Chelsea trying to sign him, or any other club, to be perfectly honest, looking for a left winger. I thought it'd be quite difficult to get a Frenchman out of PSG. That's my only sort of concern, because it could impact him for the actual French squad. That's all like rumours. I don't know exactly, but sometimes they prefer them to be in the same country. I know you can still, if he goes and excels at Chelsea, he would definitely be in the squad, but just could harm him not being in the French league. Is my only little concern.
Yeah, I think out of the two, he definitely makes more logical sense, and there's definitely a higher chance we'd get him over Doué. But again, just to touch on that point, is we do have some other players there. Like I've not even mentioned Tyreek George as an example. Again, young potential, part of the academy. We've got, as I said, we've got Willian coming in, Esteval Willian coming in, who could be sensational. And then we've also got someone who no one's talking about is Giovanni Quenda, who again, he's 17 years old, been unbelievable at the under-19s Euros, and he look again. It's only clips. I can't say I've watched games after games of him, but again, it's another player who maybe could get through to the squad and could break through. So it's like, do we need to go and invest 80 million pounds potentially in one of these players, or do we just want to take a risk and avoid spending? So yeah, time will tell, I guess, on that one.
Yeah, absolutely. And let's go with your final sort of position and player, Jordan, that Maresca needs.
Yeah, so final position is a striker. We've known this for a while. I think the signing of Liam Delap in hindsight is phenomenal business. £30 million in a game and a half. I've seen enough to know that's a good investment in this day and age in this market for a player who's prem proven and 22 years old. But we do need cover. We need options. We need competition. Jackson, if you are social media, they want him out on the next flight. But again, I'm not going to overreact. He's showing a little bit of an experience at this level. He's showing a bit of naivety, but I don't necessarily think that he should be sold at the first opportunity. And again, just to touch on my previous point, he can also play behind the striker. I would not hate Jackson playing on the left wing if we didn't sign one of the players I've just mentioned. It is possible. He's had some good games there. So I will just throw that in there. Um, for me, again, for those who have watched our podcast, when we did Arsenal's rebuild, I'm not going to repeat everything I said there, but I still think the man in the market to go after and get is Victor Gyökeres. Again, don't want to repeat myself too much. 26 years old, in his prime. You're looking at about £65 million to £70 million all in. A player who wants to leave Sporting, a player who clearly wants to be in the Prem, and a player who's got ridiculous goal and assist stats and is someone I would describe as a goal machine. Just pay the money. Even if it's not us, someone just pay the money and take a risk on him because he, for me, is probably the best value for money striker. Not guaranteed, but he's probably the best value for money risk to reward in the market right now.
That's the thing you're just saying there is Gyökeres is a risk. Look, I like him a lot, but like I said, Tony Bloom hasn't got much wrong. £80 million or £70 million, this gentleman's agreement that they had with him is a lot of money to pay for a player who in the Premier League isn't going to get as much space as he does in Portugal. And if that's what he needs to thrive, that's going to cause a lot of problems. Otherwise, he probably would have made that move to England by now. I think that's the issue there. And like I said, if they're not going to budge on 70, £80 million, how are a lot of clubs with FFP and PSR going to pay for that? If they're not going to allow installments or something like that, it's very hard to get. And I think, like I said, tactically, he becomes a bit of an issue. I wouldn't be shocked if Jackson and Delap are the first two choices. It would make sense. Otherwise, you know, unless you sell Jackson, what you're going to do. But I think if you're looking for another player, I think Hugo Ekitike at Frankfurt would be a good fit. The guy got 15 goals in the Bundesliga. He left PSG because he didn't want to play second fiddle. So he'd have to probably play more than what Delap does. But I think you've got a player there who would fit the mould and Chelsea's tactics very well.
Yeah, I've seen some early comparisons to Thierry Henry because he can play wide as well. But the problem is with Akite, we have been rumoured with him already, and the figures that are getting quoted is around £80 million, which again, it's like with Barcola, I feel like we've seen a bit more to pay 70 mil. I've not seen that much of Akite to go, yeah, spend 80 mil. but he does fit the profile. He does have potential, all of that stuff. But I don't know. I just feel like Gyökeres. The thing is,
With
Reece, to your point, it's risk. Every player is risk, right? That's the problem. That's the day we live in. Unless they've done it in the premise of risk.
Or even then, you've seen some players who have done it in the Prem go to another club and it's just not worked out.
Yeah.
Alexis Sanchez comes to mind, kind of with that sort of brilliant at Arsenal, went to United and just did nothing. I think Frankfurt don't need to sell. You've got to remember they've got quite a bit of money from City to get Mamouche. So they're going to be like, yeah, we're going to put the price high, probably too high for what he's worth, but they don't care because it means we don't need to sell him. We've got enough money here, don't need to sell him. I was quite surprised that you went with a striker because you've signed a lap. If you hadn't signed a lap, I fully agree you needed a striker. Jackson on the left, I don't see it happening. He could do it for the odd sort of, 20, 30 minutes in a game, but I don't see him starting out on the left. It just wouldn't make much sense to me. You'd either get rid of him or it's going to be him and Delap. But I do think you are right. He is like the two red cards he's got recently have been just silly. They're just like you don't need to be like whether you think they're red cards or not. I guess you can have a debate on that, but like don't be in that position. The sort of the way he went in the Club World Cup one just didn't need to do that. There was no need to do that. Whether it's sort of like you've seen a lot worse tackles be red cards. I've seen worse tackles not be given as red cards. Don't get me wrong, but don't put yourself in that position. That's the biggest problem with Jackson. However, like I said, with the striker position, I was quite surprised because I think you need a centre back. I don't think you've got the full on quality pairing. I quite like Colwill. I don't mind who's your Chalobah and Tosin.
Yeah.
I don't mind them as three of your four, but they'd be the reserves. And I'd say get someone like Mark Gahey. That would be my preference if I was a Chelsea fan. I think get that sort of Gahey Colwill as your sort of centre back pairing. Tosin and Chalobah, very good backups. And I think that would be very good for you. I don't know what you make of that. I know it's different to what you're saying with the striker, but
Yeah, the problem is Gurhey is going to cost probably 60 mil, and he's not that much better than Chalabar, and I don't think he's that much better than Tosin. I think he's had a few better seasons, so you could argue it's lower risk. But if we're being sensible and we're doing realistic signings and we're trying to not spend money where we don't need to, I don't think we need desperately to sign a centre back. Colwell's the guy. You put Chalobah next to him, you put Tossa next to him. Again, you've also got to bear in mind we've got Badiashile and Disasi. Worst cat. I'm not saying either of them are going to set the world alight, and I would definitely look to
I was
sell at
going to get
least.
started. Then you didn't have to get me started on them two. Using them, if you want to win the if you want to, win like the Premier League or at least title challenging, them two cannot be in your side for more than 5 games.
Yeah, fair.
So this is it.
Uh,
I think you need four strong centre backs overall. It doesn't have to be like they don't all have to be world class. I'm not saying world beaters, but overall, I'd say that
I
that's
guess
kind of my point of view. You need a centre back.
I guess to your argument, I would say we could sell Disasi and Badiashile combined for the cost of Gurhey. And then we've got Colwill, Gurhey, Chalabar, and Tosin, which I think then becomes pretty good. Um, yeah, I don't think that's as desperate as a striker, personally. So yeah, for me, Gyökeres still. The only other one I'd chuck in just quickly before we wrap up is Jonathan David at Lille, just because he's free. He's out of contract this summer. Again, I'm not saying he's 100% guaranteed to be unreal, but he's shown glimpses of potential. He's only 25. And again, if we're being sensible, free transfer. So he's one I'd chuck in as well.
I would also look at, just as we wrap up here, some experience. Players that been there, done it, got the t-shirt, you could probably get them pretty cheap, or players that at least show leadership. I mean, if you really wanted to go down that route, there are plenty of current players in the Premier League. Like I said, Mark Gea is perfect for that. Bruno Guimaraes at Newcastle. If you wanted another midfielder, he would work as well. Even if you got someone in to bring in the, help with the young players a little bit, I think they would work quite nicely. I think that should be a key target area for Chelsea, personally.
Yeah, no. That's fair. It's just the age. That's the only thing. At the end of the day, we've got to do it. We've got to do it within. We're clearly going for win the league with kids, so it's got to make sure they're young enough to fit the profile. But look, that's all we got time for. As always, thank you for viewing. Let us know your thoughts on Chelsea's perfect summer rebuild in the comments. But as always, like, comment, and subscribe. You know the drill.